Welcome to the Choreos project demo of offline testing with the Rehearsal tool. The Choreos development process is a flexible process that can be adjusted to the different realities of different companies. Companies have different development cultures, development methodologies, and Choreos suggests steps that can be taken to develop better quality, large-scale choreographies. So, for example, with regard to code generation, Choreos suggests adopting a model-driven engineering approach in which the developers of the choreography collect the requirements and specify a BPMN2 diagram of the choreography, and then using certain tools, synthesize automatically the code of the choreography and enact the choreography. But some companies might decide to use a more conventional approach in which developers write Java code of the components of the choreography, of the services, and of the control of the choreography, and enact it. And the Rehearsal tool can be used in both cases for doing this offline testing, which is testing the choreography before it is put into production. With regard to testing, the test can be used also in different ways. For example, a company may decide to use test-driven development, which is using tests during all the steps of the development process to refine the software that's being used, to refine the services, refine the choreography specification, better understand the requirements, the user requirements, and use tests at all moments to verify that the process is being followed in a way that's generating correct code. But it can also be used in a more conventional approach. So if you have a company culture that defines that you must collect the requirements, specify your choreography, synthesize the code of your choreography without doing any tests, you can still use tests at the end. Just before putting the service and the choreography into production, you use Rehearsal to perform this offline testing to make sure that everything is ready to be put into production. So choreographies can be tested before being put into the production environment, and two different kinds of tests can be done. Functional tests to verify the correctness of the choreography operations, choreography features, and also non-functional tests, for example, to verify the scalability of the choreography. In this demo, we will concentrate in functional tests of correctness of the choreography, but Rehearsal provides support for both kinds of things. Rehearsal is an open source software. It's an object-oriented framework developed within Choreos, and during choreography development, the framework supports three different kinds of testing. Compliance testing, which is a way of evaluating if a certain service plays well a certain role in a choreography, so that service can be plugged into the choreography. Then we have integration tests, which are tests that enact the choreography and verify if the exchange of messages among the services in the choreography are correct, are following what we expect. And finally, acceptance testing, which are tests that will verify if the choreography is behaving correctly from the final end user perspective, if the final results produced by the choreography are correct or not. And to apply these three kinds of tests, Rehearsal provides a few functions, a few features. First is WS Client, which is a Java class that is able to dynamically generate a web service client from a WSDL specification. Second, the message interceptor, which is something that allows us to intercept the messages that are exchanged among the services in a choreography to verify if the messages are correct. Third, service mocking allows us to simulate the behavior of certain services that might not be available at the offline testing time. Maybe some services will only be available in the internet, in the production environment, and at the time of development, in the developer machine, we don't have access to that service. So we can simulate that by creating a service mock. And finally, the abstraction of the choreography in Java can be used by developers to write Java code to test the different functionalities of a choreography, to interact with the choreography using Java expressions. So to demonstrate the use of Rehearsal at this time with these three different kinds of tests, we'll use, as an example, the passenger-friendly airport choreography, which is a Choreos project use case. And we'll work here in this demo with two scenarios. First, the keep passengers for the night scenario, and then the put passengers in transit. So let's start with compliance testing. So the idea here is to verify whether a service plays a role correctly in a certain choreography. So here we use the WS client to dynamically generate a web service client from the WSDL specification. So what the programmer can do here is to execute a request of a certain operation, passing a certain arguments, giving this to the rehearsal framework that generates the XML code that is embedded in a SOAP request to the service. And if the service behaves correctly, it will send a response with XML code back to Rehearsal, who will interpret that and give a response back to the developer. So the developer will be able to write several tests to check if a certain service is compliant with a certain role in the choreography. So let's show this with the weather forecast service for our airport choreography. So here we have within Eclipse the code for the weather forecast web service test. And what we have here, we first have this method start service that instantiates the service that we want to test. Then using the choreography abstraction, we get a pointer to the choreography, a reference to the choreography, and in particular to the weather forecast role. So the specific test that we have here is should return a temperature and humidity, because to be compliant with this choreography, this service must return a temperature and a humidity when it's asked. So we use the WS client, given the URI of a certain service, to generate the client dynamically, and then we build the request arguments, in this case passing periods and a certain date and time as an argument. So the client here sends the requests, get weather at with those arguments, and get a return result from the service. And what the developer did in this case was to assert that the response has an information of the type temperature, in this case in Celsius, and another information of the type humidity percentage. So the developer is considering that if the service returns an information of kind temperature and of kind humidity, then it passes this particular compliance test. Let's go to the second type of testing, which is integration test. And the goal here is to verify whether messages are exchanged correctly by the choreography services. So we enact the choreography and start to monitor the messages that are exchanged among the services in that choreography. And this can be used to detect problems early in the life cycle of the choreography. And we can detect two different kinds of problems: functional problems, technical problems. To show this, we'll show the keep passengers for the night scenario of the airport choreography. And what we have here is a diagram, an abstract diagram of that scenario. In this scenario, the airline starts sending a message to other components, and this triggers a lot of message exchanges in the choreography. What we want to do here is to validate this exchange of messages. And to do that, what we do is to insert a proxy in certain paths here in the message that we want to evaluate. And this proxy will log to a temporary database all the message exchanges that we ask to be logged. Another thing we can do is also to apply service mocking. For example, if you don't have a weather forecast available at the time of offline testing, because, for example, in this developed machine we don't have a weather forecast service, we can use the service mock functionality to simulate. In this case, we simulate a service that returns a temperature of 12 Celsius and 92% of humidity for Paris at a certain given date. We have here the keep passengers for the night scenario. So what we do here, first we enact the choreography, parsing a few parameters that will define which scenario that we are going to test. And then, immediately after enacting the choreography, we introduce in the choreography certain interceptors and mocks. In particular, what we are doing here is we decided that we want to intercept all the messages that are sent to these 4 roles in the choreography: hotel, travel agency, airline ground staff, and so on. So everything that's being sent to these roles are logged into the temporary database. We also create here a mock to mock the weather forecast service. After creating this mocks interceptor, we actually invoke the choreography. We tell the airline to send that first message, and then everything is logged and stored in that particular database. Then we can start to execute all our integration tests, and these are the tests that we have implemented. We implemented 1 test for each kind of message interchange that we have in this choreography. Let's show, as an example, just 2 of these tests. For example, ground transportation company should receive a booking request. To verify that, we first get the messages that are sent to the ground transportation company, and we see, for example, if the first message is a book request to request transportation, for one passenger called John Doe, which is actually what we wrote in our scenario. So if this is correct, then we assume that this message exchange is correct. Another example is airline ground staff should receive booking receipts of hotel and transportation. What we do here is to verify if they look at the airline ground staff messages and check if it contains one amenity for hotel and one for transportation. And for doing that, we use this helper method, contains amenity here, that what it does is it looks at all the messages that the airline ground staff received and see in the messages that are of the type put booking receipt, it verifies if there is, as a content, an amenity type, first of type hotel and then of type transportation. So we verify that it received at least one hotel and at least one transportation, and if it does, then we assume that this part of the conversation of message exchange in the choreography is correct. Let's go then to the third type of testing that we can do, which is acceptance testing. And what we do here is to validate the choreography from the end user perspective. And this should be applied in an environment as similar as possible to the production environment just before putting the choreography into the production environment. So hopefully we should be able to do that without interceptors and mocks to have the performance closer to what we would have in a real-life scenario. Here again, a choreography functionality is seen as a whole, as a service, and then it can be tested with the help of a AWS client, which is used for validation. To show this, we will validate the put passengers in transit scenario. So this is the file that we have for acceptance tests. We have here 2 acceptance tests. First, in the setup, before starting the test, what we do, we get a reference to the choreography using our abstraction of choreography, and in particular for the row airline. Then, what we do in our test here, we will look at this test. Should put passenger in transit and receive 3 amenities. So what we do here is enact the choreography, passing those parameters that will specify a certain scenario, and then using the AWS client that we instantiate here, we build a request, and the request here is an operation of the type one-way route for passenger John Doe for flight AF 457. And we send that request, one-way route, with those arguments. We wait, in this case, for 10 seconds, and then we verify if the message that the airline ground staff received contains, if all the messages that it contains have at least 3 different amenities. And if this is true, then we consider that the choreography passes this particular acceptance test. And we can write several acceptance tests to test different scenarios of the choreography. As a conclusion, using rehearsal at development time in an offline environment, a developer can use its own machine to test a lot of things within the execution of a certain choreography. Services can be tested in isolation, so we can do compliance testing to verify if a certain service can play a certain role in a choreography. We can verify the messages exchanged among the choreographies, which is what we call integration tests, to see if the services can be integrated correctly. And we can test the entire choreography in what we call acceptance tests from the point of view of end users. And the big thing is that choreographies can be tested before being put into the production environment, and we can test functional aspects, the correctness of the choreographies, which is what we showed here, but also using rehearsal, we can test things like the scalability of a certain choreography. So if you have any question, you can please feel free to email us, either email me, Professor Fabio Con, or Philippe Besson, and we'll be very happy to answer any questions you may have. But before finalizing the demo, we are actually going to execute the tests here, and rehearsal is embedded within the Eclipse development environment, in particular using the JUnit plugin to give a visual interface to the tests that are being executed. So in this example, we are executing 11 tests. One is a compliance test, then we execute 8 different integration tests, one for each kind of message exchange, and then the 2 acceptance tests that we mentioned before. So in this case, we executed the 11 tests, and we had 0 errors and 0 failures. So this green bar means that all the 11 tests passed and are correct. So we have a good chance to have a well-functioning choreography in our hands, and now we are ready to put it into production to verify it working in the runtime environment.